And so we're going to begin. We're very glad each one of you are here. Um, in the earlier session, we discovered that we were not able to see a number of our people who were actually in the conference. So in fact, we were only able to see the four of us, although we had several more. So we're not really sure what our participation is at this point, but the five of us are going to have a good time regardless. And just in the way of introduction, James Wells is a music minister at Brentwood United Methodist Church in Nashville, Tennessee, and he's also involved with the Nashville Children's Choir. And James is really a specialist when it comes to working with children, working with youth. He is very, very fine at this work. James, we're really glad to have you as a part of us today, as part of the panel that we'll discuss. And Anna Osterman has been choral director for 6 or 7 years at Brandeis High School here in San Antonio. It's almost next door to me here, very close. And Anna is in somewhat of a career shift right now that we're not real sure where that's going to go. But she is a true wonderful professional um, in choral work with high schoolers. Very large 6A high school, correct? Was
Yes.
where you were, Brandeis. Okay.
Yes.
And David Stevenson, we just heard that he is high school choral director at Lexington High School in Lexington, South Carolina. And I've asked us today to discuss some of the ways that the students inspire our work and our ministry and our direction with them. You know, we talk a lot about renewable energy and how we are trying to get us to where we're not so not so dependent upon fossil fuel, but we are dependent upon energy that can renew itself. Now, when you have done the work about as long as I have, it's easy to feel like that maybe you're part fossil fuel in that. But what happens is that when you begin to connect with the students that you're directing, you discover that they, in many ways, become your renewable energy. Those students will will inspire us. The students will motivate us in ways. Now, that's not to say that we can just fall into a situation and the students are going to provide all of this. Obviously, we have to have professionalism and direction and passion about what we're doing. But if we do that and build those relationships, then the students are going to help us in a lot of ways as we become close to them. So I've asked our panelists uh, to have two examples of ways that your students have inspired you over the years. And Anna, I'm going to ask you to be first. Would you jump in there and give us a couple of examples of the way students have inspired you or helped you?
Definitely. One of the ones that sticks out to me is that it was pre-pandemic. Okay, we're going all the way back. And students are coming into the room, and I have a plan for what I want to do for rehearsal, and this is what we're going to do, and I have it all written on the board, and everything's ready to go. And I could just tell that they needed something different. It's like they're walking in and their energy is just totally different. And I was like, you know what? Let's just talk for a second. And that just opened up such a huge realm of opportunity for building those relationships. And then it got to the music. We got there later, but we were able to have such heart to hearts and talk about just real life and real things that were going on with these students and things like that. That had they walked in and I was like, this is what we're doing for rehearsal, and just went with what I wanted to do, I never would have had that opportunity to get to know those students on a different level. So my big thing was always just to follow the students down the rabbit hole, and just allow the things to just organically happen. Um, and for them to be able to trust each other and to trust me and to follow me through the journey that we were going on. Um, so it's so much about just like you said, building those relationships and grasping onto that, and leaning into that as much as possible.
Anna, is that a difficult thing to do, to kind of go off of lesson plan when you're in a public school situation?
Oh,
Are you dis
completely.
are you discouraged from doing that kind of thing? Are you not supposed to do that kind of thing? How does that work?
I don't like to play by the rules sometimes, so it works for me. But
Yeah.
as well, especially when it's like we were actually when that the day that I'm thinking of in my head was we were getting ready for contest. Like our contest was coming up in a couple weeks, and it was like I was like, we need to get this, and this done. And it's in my head of we have 4 rehearsals left. It's go time. We need to get this done. It's crunch time.
Hmm.
But it was like I could drag them through the mud if I wanted to. But what's that? Like, that's not what anybody needed then. And we had kind of a traumatic experience happen on our, like with some students on our campus. And so it was something they needed to work through. And
Right.
it was more important for us to be there as human beings at the time, and then use the music to heal
Hmm.
what was happening. And it was such a beautiful day. And I I feel like we all grew as musicians that day.
Yeah, I'm sure you
Much
did.
more than my lesson plans would have, that's for sure.
James, talk to us. Same question.
Well, and I think it's good what you've asked us. I also think it's good that we work we work in the same realm in very different settings, or quite different settings. An assigned class roster in a school setting to in this case, in my case, very much a volunteer specific community of faith. And so, but we're working with, the same age groups in some of the artistically, we're trying to accomplish a lot of the same things. I would say I thought specifically on things since the pandemic. One would just be Randy, and you and I've discussed this and been involved in some of the various ways we've had to be creative to adapt and continue to make music. But just the word resiliency comes to mind. Willing to a core of willing students uh, to try to willing to do most anything to remain in community, and sometimes that's music making, and sometimes that's just nurturing them through hard stuff, which often ends up nurturing ourselves through hard stuff, um, and this and the fact that they seem truly um, sincerely thankful that they weren't given up on, right? That we could have easily just said, once we can have a full school year, a normal experience, we'll start back up and we're here for you. But the fact that many of them, many of our students wanted to just keep doing whatever it is they could do. Um, so resiliency is one that comes to mind for sure.
Yeah. David, same question. Uh, what what has your student what have your students done that have inspired you over this time? Or what have they said to you?
Well, I'm going to go with um, pre-pandemic and then inter-pandemic, I guess you could deem it. Pre-pandemic, I've also, especially over the past 10 years or so, I've really made it a priority to try and get to know them a lot better, even before we start day one of school, because we're here because of the students, and without them we wouldn't be in our positions. So at the beginning of the year, every year, I do a getting to know you inventory, and it's got tons of questions on there. And sometimes, not all of the questions are musical. A lot of them are just like, what's your favorite kind of ice cream, or what, but then it could be serious, like what are your hopes and dreams for what you want to do after high school. And so what I try to do is I go through those, and sometimes there are nuggets that I pull out of there that give me connections and inspires me to try and pour into those students, and gives me a talking point and a connection to pour into them. So really getting to know them, and that also affects repertoire choices, getting to know them. And a lot of times, especially this past year, we spent a lot of times listening to music, trying to get their opinions and their feedback on potential pieces. So that's one piece of it. Now, during the pandemic, our school came back to normal in the fall. Normal, I really can't say that. It wasn't normal. We had an A-day cohort and a B-day cohort. So Monday and Tuesday, half the students came, and then Wednesday, Thursday, half the students came, and Friday, everybody was virtual. Of course, when they split the alphabet by last name, they weren't really thinking about choral directors and making things even, especially in terms of gender and voice part, and even just numbers. So when they split the alphabet, one of my classes, my top choir, we had 6. And the other half, the other cohort, had like 20. And so it was just not an even split. And of course, we also had the guidelines. We had the guidelines put out there by ACDA and NAFME and all those places. And we could sing for 30 minutes at a time without then having to change rooms. So that left 15 minutes left over in a 75-minute rehearsal.
Wow.
I took those, so we would rehearse for 30 minutes and then move to another room for 30 minutes. So I have 15 minutes left over. And the point I want to drive home to speak to your question is, this year in particular, I really made it a point to take 15 minutes at the beginning of the rehearsal. We don't even know if we're going to be able to have concerts. We didn't know a lot of things. And so I took those 15 minutes and I just talked to them. It was kind of what Anna was saying. But it was every rehearsal. We took 15 minutes and we just talked, and we had the time to do it. We never have the time to do it. It always feels like we're have our foot on the gas all the way, pedal to the metal all the time, because we've got certain deadlines to meet. Well, this year, we didn't know the deadlines. We didn't know what was going to happen. So they inspired me to come to and talk to them and check and see how they were doing, and to try and forge those
even deeper for this little 15 minutes
at the beginning of each rehearsal. And, I work in a secular institution. I've worked in churches for the past 24 years, off and on, mostly on rather than off. And so it is a form of ministry as what we are doing. We really can't call it as such because of where we are, but we're trying to pour into them and make sure that they are okay, especially in this unprecedented and trying time that we've both experienced the past year and a half.
Yeah. So I'm assuming now that since all of us here are serious musicians, serious choral people, we believe in this idiom, we believe in the choral art, that we are constantly seeking to raise the bar for our students musically. And we could talk all day and the rest of the week about the ways that we raise the bar for them musically. but I'm going to assume that that's happening in each one of our situations, and those who are, listening to the class. But I'm going to ask the panelists now, what are some ways that are extra musical or non-musical where you really push your students and raise the bar for them to help them become better? Non-musical ways that you seek to do that. Anna, let's start with you.
I have always believed that as a choir director, I'm teaching the whole student, and that music is just a venue for me to teach them life lessons and for ways for them to become better human beings and all of those things. So I do my best to, even in rehearsal, to take it back to real life, because and I tell them, not everybody is gonna major in music, not everybody's gonna stand up here at the podium. That's not realistic. But what are the things that we're learning now that we can take with us outside of here? And so talking to them about just like leadership qualities, that's a huge thing that I talk to my officers about. And one of the things that we talk about in rehearsal all the time with section leaders and things like that, I hated naming section leaders because I wanted everybody to have that leadership opportunity, or just see who organically would become leaders. So I really like to try to drive home the leadership and the teamwork aspect of things, of and the things that we can accomplish together versus individually. That was the big thing last year, that it was like we were majority on Zoom the majority of the year, and it was like you're all doing your own thing, and I was hoping that you're singing on the other side of that screen. And then when we came back together for our first rehearsal in person together, oh my gosh, it was like they sang like the first two measures, and I just stopped them. I was like, guys, oh my gosh, can you believe it? And it's those things that we've taken for granted and things like that, that you think like, oh, I'm just singing at home, it's fine. But then the togetherness and the teamwork and all of those things, that it was through music, but it's all those things outside of music that it's like, think about all of that, and the things that we can accomplish together, and be able to just give them those skills through my class. But Lord, gosh, we talk about everything, and so I have an open door policy, and so they come and we just, so many life lessons that come through things, that it's just, that's my favorite part, is just what comes out of it.
Mm-hmm. David?
The biggest thing that we do to try and raise the bar that I try to instill in them is trying to come together for each choir as a family. And if we don't try to get to know each other and have celebrations and small little things like encouraging sticky notes that are randomly put in folders, or this year we're going to start a mentor-mentee kind of program, because we've ostensibly lost 2 cycles of recruiting due to the pandemic, not being able to go to the middle schools in person and things of that nature. So I'm going to forge that connection with our middle school students so that our high school students can inspire them and kind of mentor them, be like a big brother or big sister to them. But, and then being on, so we have Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, thinking of a good way to, a legal way to do is TikTok and things like that this year. And because all these things are coming together as a family, because I really feel like it's my job to be able to be the dad, but not be the dad who's the not cool dad. To try and find what makes them tick, be able to keep up with the trends and what they're doing, and be able to speak their language so that we can come together as a family, because everybody's there for a different purpose in the choir. Some people just want to sing and they want to contribute. Some people have leadership qualities that are born in them or that they learn. And some people are there because they want to feel a sense of belonging. They find choir is a safe place where they fit in and they belong. And so all of those aspects really come together to make the family aspect, because if we're not together and we're not a family, we're not going to achieve great things.
James, raising the bar in ways other than musically.
Yeah, I almost forgot what I was going to speak on because I'm taking notes on what they're talking about. This is really good stuff. I could go on and on about both of what they were speaking on, especially working in a church setting with writing notes. And one of the favorite things we did this summer were these things we called affirmation bags, these paper, just plain old paper bag that you leave in the corner the week that they're rehearsing or preparing for something, and they've got all week to notice some reason that they ought to be affirming another peer of theirs, and they drop a note in that bag, and at the end of the week they get to read, the ways that their peers have affirmed them. Those are cool things. Paper plate awards, this is the dumbest thing, but it's so meaningful to them, where you take a group of leaders and you have them notice some things about the rest of the choir, and then at the end of the semester or pick a whatever you're doing, and they'll come up with these funny ways to present them with an award. And it might be sometimes it's something that everybody knows, or sometimes it's a little bit of an inside joke, but it lets everybody in on it. Oh, and this happened and this was funny, and everybody kind of just laughs together. But I was specifically going to speak to just the way that we can learn not only musically from the texts that we sing, but the way that we can learn about what it tells us about ourselves and humanity. I and most all of the things that I use, I've kind of gleaned or stolen from others, but my a senior pastor we had about 20 years ago would say at the end of his sermon, he would say, and now for the M&M, and he would call it the medicine in the message. What can you take with you for the anecdote, right? Of how can you use this to be a medicine or a balm for your life. And so I take that same M&M and we talk about what's the message in the music. So what are you actually singing about, and what do you we often talk about what's the actual message. And so there's two approaches to it. There's the intrinsic value of the text, but there's also the way you are performing the text, not even musically, but just visually. With what does your body language look like? What's your face look like when you say this? Philip Schultz, who's up in Minnesota and a good friend and someone I've learned from, he would say, are you sending a mixed message? Does the message, your body language and face say, does it match the message in the text? And if it doesn't, you're sending a mixed message. If it does, it's tying in that human element of what you're actually sharing. And so coming at it from that angle, it's a performing thing, yes, but it's also just a human thing. It's a getting that text across in a meaningful way, because you can sing the most beautiful phrases and sing every one of Judy Bower's expressive singing rules, but if you don't look the part, something is really lost. So that's one way we like to raise the bar, and sometimes it can cover a multitude of sins you might make musically. because you sure looked it. If you may have missed this or that, but you sure looked the part.
Well, and seeing your students perform recently on video, you're even behind the masks. You could tell as they were singing. You could tell by their eyes and their body language, their stance, that their bar is raised very high for that whole experience. And so it's working, James. Whatever you're doing is working. So I would like to ask the three of you now, what are the main methods that you use to communicate with your students outside of the rehearsal? And for our two public school teachers, that may be just prescribed by the school district that you use. But we'd like to know what those are. And then, James, you're probably going to have a wider array of that because you're in a church that doesn't prescribe all of that, and you're probably pretty free to go for that. But so, Anna, talk to us about how you communicate. And we're kind of getting into the whole area now of trying to find how to cross over some of the hurdles of communication that we have with our students. Anna?
I'm in a very big district, and so we have a lot of rules about what we can and can't do. When I first started teaching 12 years ago, it was a little bit more relaxed. But we have, like, we're not supposed to give students our numbers, all that kinds of things. But, you know, when we go on trips and stuff like that, and when you're talking with like booster club parents, and it happens, right?
Right.
So there's a couple different, like we had group me messages, we used Remind 101, all of those kinds of things. But really this past year, the kids actually started checking their email. That was amazing.
How bizarre.
I know. So that turned into my main form of communication, just because it was consistent with everything else that was happening
Yep.
throughout the year. But we used to, like, we had I had choir social media accounts. So I would use Instagram and Twitter and all those things as well. But we're pretty limited on what we're supposed
Yeah.
to use.
Okay. David?
Well, next year will be year 20 teaching, and things have changed dramatically over that time from the beginning, where if you had a last minute time change of a concert or a cancellation or something where you needed to reach out, you had to pick up the phone and call, 50 kids, and it was just so time consuming. So the thing that I use is Remind. I don't have a single student's phone number. Even on trips, we use Remind. It's a way that I can contact them immediately and efficiently. So Remind has been a lifesaver and a game changer for me. As I previously referenced, we do have different social media accounts. And this year, I've started doing something a little different. I've got a student, a very, very trustworthy student, who is my social media manager. And so she's running that. And so we've got Instagram, which is one of the things they still check a lot. But, the parents, each generation is so different. Gen Zers are all about TikTok and Instagram. They don't touch Facebook or Twitter with a 10-foot pole. And so, but it's, for me, Generation X or millennials, even, it's more Facebook, sometimes Twitter, that they'll reach out to. So, and they'll check more frequently. Everybody has problems with email. Email is a big, big issue because we just get inundated with so many, and it's so hard to filter. So, I'll have the very dedicated emailers. I know who's going to respond to me before I even reach out. But, you know, if you don't have your footprint in social media, those and try to tailor it to your constituents for whichever medium they use, there's going to be a disconnect. So that's what we do in our program, and it seems to be working pretty well.
Yeah, great. James?
Well, I know we're going to speak to some primary means of communicating with them, you know, down the line. But I know that was this specifically on ways that we were encouraging them, or more in
No,
communication?
specific in communication. The primary means of communication that
I
you
got
use
you.
with
Okay.
your students outside of the rehearsal.
Yeah, and because I am in a different setting, you know, feeling like they can reach out to me with a text message is a just another level of one-on-one that you don't have necessarily the luxury of in some public school settings, and so you certainly have to be careful with that. I'm fortunate enough to not have that as an issue, so we have, you know, although although I'm easily distracted, so I try to avoid group me's as much as I can, or I encourage them to have them and then let me know when I need to know something. Otherwise, I can't handle all the notifications. So one-on-one group texting is, one-on-one texting with students, especially when, um, um, especially as they get older and they take on some leadership roles. As they're younger, it's a lot more just, you know, encouragement to them, or them letting me know that, you know, perhaps they've got a school musical, and they know I would be interested in seeing that, or, you know, I try to stay invested in things that are meaningful to them when I can, and so we'll communicate that way. As far as communicating, you know, details and things, you know, we do use email, um, when it, especially when it involves what their families need to know, not just them personally. Um, I have, you know, students, just like David said, you have a few kinds of students that um, do well with email, but the majority, you know, it's just like it didn't exist, as if you're relying on that. So we do have social media. They'll reach out messaging. They like to message a lot through Instagram accounts and various things. Um, I, um, I we also, since I work in a church setting, I'm able to multiply the visibility by including uh, specific things that might be related to children in a children's ministry area, or students in a student ministry area. So there's some advantages to having extra visibility and not being the one that has to necessarily send the information. Just get the information in a communication that somebody else is going to send is kind of helpful as well.
I want to change gears here just a little bit. And we're talking a lot about communication here. And that's okay, that's good, because as we talk about the way that the students inspire us, it is oftentimes through these deeper levels of communication that we establish with them. So talk to us a bit about society in general, our world in general, even if the pandemic had not occurred, which is almost a crazy thing to say, because it's kind of like, you know, I mean, who can imagine a world where the pandemic had not happened? But even before the pandemic occurred, we were dealing with some real hurdles and some issues of developing good, strong, healthy, close relationships with students. Has to do with expectations. It has to do with what is socially acceptable. Um, what do you see those issues being, and how can we make a difference? For one thing, let me just kind of throw the first one out to tell you what I'm talking about. Millennial students, and many of them are beyond millennial now, of course, but the younger generations tend to want to keep all of their options open for as long as they possibly can. Whether they're going to commit to something that you're doing, or whether they're going to commit to something else, to get that commitment early and to get them to stay with that commitment can be a difficult thing, because the tendency, is it not, is to try to keep as many options open as possible for as long as possible. That's what I perceive as being a real issue. And we have to figure out a way to jump that hurdle to get them to get in proper relationship and connection with them. And we do that through the different kinds of communication and building the kind of program and the kind of relationships that they can depend on being steady. So those are the kinds of big picture hurdles. Anybody want to jump in here with some more ideas about what some of society's big hurdles are that we are going to have to continue to clear if we're going to still have meaningful choir programs and meaningful relationships with kids? Anybody? It's kind of a heavy question, really.
I think we have to continue to show the value. It's really easy to be like, oh, well, we just turn on the radio, we listen to music, yeah, it's all there, whatever. But it's like, well, it came from somewhere, right? And also just providing value even beyond music, like what we've kind of been talking about. And
Right.
I would get students that would be like, well, I've done choir for 4 years, like middle school through. Now I want to try something different. I'm like, but the value in seeing something all the way through is so different than when you're here, when you're there, and just like kind of hopping from one thing to the next. And so um, for me, I think it's showing the value in what we do beyond just that one performance, but the value that goes holistically.
And would you agree, Anna, that a big part of that showing the value is the modeling that is done with your current students for those that are younger?
Very much so. And just showing them that I care about them as a human being rather than just as a member of my choir.
Mhm.
That shows a ton.
Yeah. Someone else? Anyone else?
I'll support the value piece that she just spoke about. And I think that also happens, it also goes along with a lot of socioeconomic issues that we face, because I've taught in both high poverty index schools and I've taught in very affluent schools. And so, in a lot of areas, you have a lot of things to choose from that are out there between athletics and academics, for AP classes here, for IB, for all of these things that are competing for students' attention, and they do want to dip their toes in a bunch of different bodies of water to see how it feels. So you've got that, but I've also seen, especially in a high poverty index school, I think students are going to commit to something longer and stick it out longer. And I think that also could be said of churches too. Now that you have a totally different set of challenges that come with that, with being in a poverty school or a school district that has high poverty levels. So for me, you trade one set of issues with another when you're talking about different challenges. But I agree with everything that she just said.
Okay. James, any thoughts on that?
Well, the way you presented it, what are the hurdles? I think technology has proven to be a double-edged sword. It is the way that we, at its best, it's a great way to reach people quickly, to get, quick responses, access to, things quickly, both good and not so helpful things as well. Very, very, those of us that are already distractible are, are in a bad way if we don't set some boundaries there. There's social pressures, just the schedules of busy students. Um, I wrote down family stresses.
Yeah.
These students are, coming with all kinds of baggage, and that's where a good choral director, a good musical director, um, becomes part-time, uh, counselor and
Social worker.
social worker, therapist,
Mm-hmm.
just small group leader.
Yeah.
And if some beautiful music happens to happen, then that's good too. Then so I think one of the hurdles that I have noticed is, and I don't know, I would be curious to see if it resonates with the other panel members working primarily in public school settings, but the idea that students are, feel as if oftentimes they have to be good at something already before they try something.
Mm-hmm.
That immediate gratification idea of, I, I'm not a singer, so I won't join the choir.
Yeah.
And so there's all kinds of, that could be that's a session of its own, Randy, I
It
guess.
is. It is.
But the idea of getting them engaged in something that they don't have expertise in, but they see that, I've heard you use the phrase intrinsic value. They can see that, and you even mentioned it with Anna, with their students. The older students modeling it for the younger students. Just seeing that, hey, well, that guy is on the, you know, that athletic team, but he's also in the choir,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever it might be. But just breaking down that barrier of, you know, you don't have to be the best at something, or you don't even have to have a certain level of experience in something to invest, valuable time into it.
Yeah. We've got just a few minutes left, and I want to ask you each to kind of crystallize some final thoughts for us about the way that no doubt you inspire your students, but also the way your students have inspired you uh, through your teaching time. And I will kind of start that off by just saying that I never cease to be amazed, and I never cease to be surprised by the students who are in my choirs, because just about the time that I think I have some of them figured out, they will surprise me with some insight or some action or some word spoken or some hug given at just the right time for somebody who really needs it. And it makes me appreciate all over again just the power of youth, the power of, and I'm not talking about a group of people, youth, I'm talking about the power of being young and um, how that plays itself out in so many ways. Of course, part of being young is an inherent stupidity. That the kids' frontal lobes are not formed yet. And, if another way I used to say it long ago when it was maybe less uh, politically correct to say it, but I used to say that all the kids I work with are brain damaged, and because their frontal lobes are not yet formed. It's not because of anything, but the fact that their uh, that their reasoning and their sense of logic has not grown together yet. It hasn't come together. So look back on a time when my 15-year-old son would say something, um, and I would think, "Oh my gosh, that was brilliant. I mean, he must be a genius. That was the most insightful thing I've ever heard anybody say, much less a teenager." And 2 minutes later, he'd say the stupidest thing that you've ever heard. And he's equally passionate about both of them, And you're just going, what is this? Well, it's the teenage years. But there's something in there that, gosh, when they hit it and get it right, it's just mind blowing. Um, and they never cease to surprise, never cease to amaze. Somebody else, Anna?
Um, and something that someone said before just made me think of this is that not selling them short, and providing them the opportunities to amaze you, um one of my dear friends actually started a company called the Love Letter Library, and it's all about writing love letters to people, and not even to someone specifically, but to just anonymous people, and then leaving them in random places. And she's got this envelope that says, if you find this letter, it belongs to you. And so drop it in the middle of Target, drop it in the middle of HEB, whatever. And then someone finds that letter and finds something encouraging. And so it's not necessarily about writing what you think someone else wants to hear, but writing what's on your heart and writing what you need to hear. Because if you need to hear it, someone else probably needs to hear it too.
Absolutely.
And so I started doing that with my students. And so I would challenge them to write even just a sticky note or write something, but leave it somewhere on campus for someone else to find. They didn't have to know who was going to find it. Hopefully they didn't know who was going to find it. And it was just something encouraging for someone. And that uplifted them so much just by writing the words. And then we started the traveling journal. And so they would write an anonymous letter and give it to me. And they would give me a list of some people that they think might need it. And I would pass it off to someone else. And then they would get that letter and read it. and then write another letter to someone else. But the idea was that it was anonymous and that it wasn't like a popularity thing of like, oh, well, I want to send it to her and I want to send it to him. But they would write an anonymous letter, and then I would just be on the lookout and be like, that kid's having a really hard day today. I'm going to give you this letter. But it wasn't from me. It was from someone else. And so it was just a nice way to give them the opportunity to be there for each other that they didn't even realize they had.
That's great. James, got 30 seconds.
In
sorry.
this time of no, it's great. In this time of post-pandemic, where so many choirs are needing to be, and everything is needing to be rebuilt, knowing that if our choirs were meant for every student we came across to be there, they wouldn't be special. So I have been guilty of focusing more energy on who, as a volunteer director, as who wasn't there, rather than investing all my energy or as much as possible in those that are there. I've learned a lot from that.
Great. David, you have 30 seconds.
I would have to say we need to advocate for our choirs, and not only, like Anna was saying earlier, the value of it, because the value is there not only for school choirs, but in a time where we're seeing church youth choirs start to die away. And I really feel like that's something that we need to combat against, because we need to, they inspire us, and we in turn try to inspire them. And so I really feel like that the advocacy part needs to continue in both mediums, so that students, not only students in schools, but students in churches, can have the opportunity for choral music to enrich their lives.
Thank you all very, very much. We're out of time, but we're grateful for everything you've contributed to us. And have a good day.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks, Randy.